Rome, the Eternal City, holds secrets deeper than its catacombs, tales wilder than its ancient legends. For centuries, the papacy, the ultimate spiritual authority, became a chessboard for Europe's most powerful families. But one name, above all others, whispers through the hallowed halls of the Vatican with a particularly scandalous and transformative echo: Medici. This wasn't just a family, it was a dynasty of bankers, rulers, and power players who shaped Renaissance Florence. Then, they set their sights on the very throne of St. Peter, pulling strings, forging alliances, and even siring popes. 6 of them, to be exact, or at least 6 with connections so deep they might as well have worn the Medici crest on their papal tiaras. Get ready for a wild ride through history, where faith, money, and power collide in explosive ways. Number 1. Leo X Giovanni di Lorenzo de Medici. The year was 1475. In the heart of Florence, a city bursting with artistic genius and cutthroat politics, Giovanni di Lorenzo de Medici entered the world. He was the second son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, the undisputed master of Florence, a man who mingled with philosophers and plotted with princes. Giovanni's destiny was mapped out almost from birth, far from the banking and trading that made his family rich. His father, Lorenzo, had grand ambitions for his children, especially for Giovanni. Lorenzo envisioned a Medici on the papal throne, a vision he pursued with relentless charm and cunning. Though Giovanni was a bright child, sharp-witted, and fond of luxury. He loved fine clothes, exotic food, and the company of artists and intellectuals. His education was top-notch, tutored by the best minds Florence had to offer. He studied Latin, Greek, music, and philosophy. But his most important lessons came from observing his father navigate the treacherous waters of Italian politics. Lorenzo taught Giovanni about power, influence, and the art of the deal. The family's wealth, built on banking and commerce, flowed like a river through Italy and beyond, providing the fuel for Lorenzo's political maneuvers and Giovanni's ascent. In 1489, at the astonishingly young age of 13, Giovanni received the red hat of a cardinal. This was no ordinary appointment. It was the result of years of strategic planning and lavish gifts, from Lorenzo to Pope Innocent VIII, a pope whose own son had married Lorenzo's daughter. Even then, the papal court bristled with whispers about such a young appointment, but Lorenzo's influence was undeniable. And Giovanni spent 3 years quietly studying in Rome, learning the ropes of the Curia, the papal administration. He was still too young to vote in a conclave, the secret election of a new pope, but he was positioned for the future. When Lorenzo the Magnificent died in 1492, Florence was plunged into uncertainty. Giovanni's older brother, Piero the Unfortunate, took over the family's rule. But Piero lacked his father's touch and soon found himself exiled from Florence. Giovanni, the young cardinal, also experienced exile, traveling through Europe, building connections, and observing the changing political landscape. And he returned to Rome after the family's fortunes shifted, patiently waiting for his moment. In 1513, Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, passed away. The cardinals gathered for the conclave. The atmosphere was thick with tension. European powers jostled for influence, and factions within the College of Cardinals battled for supremacy. Giovanni, now 37, was a seasoned politician. He had charisma, connections, and, crucially, the vast wealth of the Medici family behind him. He projected an image of moderation and a desire for peace, appealing to the older cardinals weary of Julius II's wars. On March 11, 1513, Giovanni was elected pope, taking the name Leo X. Leo X's papacy began with a splash. He loved grand ceremonies, elaborate feasts, and extravagant entertainments. Rome had been neglected, and Leo X set about restoring its glory, transforming the city into a magnificent cultural center. He commissioned artists like Raphael and Michelangelo to create masterpieces. Raphael painted stunning frescoes in the Vatican's Stanze della Signatura depicting classical and religious themes with breathtaking beauty. Michelangelo continued work on the tomb of Julius II and began designing the facade for the Basilica of San Lorenzo in Florence, a project he would never fully complete. Leo X poured immense resources into the construction of the new St. Peter's Basilica, a project started by Julius II. This ambitious undertaking, meant to be the grandest church in Christendom, demanded enormous sums of money. To fund his lavish lifestyle, his artistic patronage, and the colossal building projects, Leo X turned to various sources of income. The Papal States, the church's temporal domain in Italy, provided some revenue. However, the most controversial method was the increased sale of indulgences. An indulgence was a remission of temporal punishment for sins, essentially a way to reduce time spent in purgatory. While indulgences had a long history, their aggressive sale in the early 16th century, often accompanied by elaborate marketing campaigns, sparked widespread resentment. The promise was that buying an indulgence could even release a soul from purgatory, a concept many found offensive and exploitative. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany. These theses questioned the practice of indulgences and more fundamentally challenged the authority of the Pope and the very nature of salvation. Leo X initially dismissed Luther as a squabbling friar and saw the controversy as a minor theological dispute that would soon fade. He was more concerned with Italian politics, like securing the Medici rule in Florence and protecting the Papal States from aggressive neighbors. But Luther's ideas spread like wildfire across Europe, fueled by the recently invented printing press. The Reformation, a seismic shift in Christian history, was gathering momentum. As Luther's challenges grew bolder, Leo X issued a papal bull, Exsurge Domine, in 1520, condemning 41 of Luther's propositions and threatening excommunication. Luther publicly burned the bull. In 1521, Leo X formally excommunicated Martin Luther. This act solidified the schism within Western Christianity, leading to the establishment of Protestantism. Leo X's failure to grasp the depth of the theological and social unrest, or his inability to respond effectively, allowed the movement to grow beyond his control. Beyond the religious turmoil, Leo X engaged in complex political maneuvering. He tried to balance the power of the two great European rivals, Francis I of France and Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. He allied with one, then the other, seeking to secure Medici interests and the independence of the Papal States. He also tried to organize a new crusade against the Ottoman Turks, a dream that never materialized. One notable diplomatic act was his granting King Henry VIII of England the title Defender of the Faith in 1521. This was in recognition of Henry's pamphlet, Defense of the Seven Sacraments, which strongly defended the Catholic Church against Luther's criticisms. The irony of this title would become clear just a few years later, when Henry VIII himself would break with Rome over his desire for an annulment. Leo X was a complex figure. He was a product of the Renaissance, a lover of beauty, art, and intellectual pursuits. He was charming, generous, and notoriously optimistic. However, he was also accused of being too focused on temporal power and pleasure, neglecting the spiritual needs of the church. His famous saying, "Since God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it," whether true or apocryphal, perfectly encapsulates his perceived approach to his sacred office. His papacy, which lasted 8 years, was a whirlwind of activity, marked by both cultural brilliance and profound religious upheaval. He passed away suddenly in December 1521, at the age of 46. His death left a power vacuum and a church deeply divided, facing challenges unimaginable just a decade before. The world he left behind was irrevocably changed, a testament to the ripple effects of his decisions, both deliberate and unwitting. Number 2. Clement VII, Giulio de Medici. The stage was set for another Medici to ascend the papal throne. After Leo X's death, the College of Cardinals elected a non-Medici pope, Adrian VI, a stern reformer from the Netherlands. His short, austere reign was a stark contrast to Leo X's extravagance. But Adrian VI died in 1523, opening the door for another conclave and another chance for the Medici to regain their grip on the papacy. This time, the family's candidate was Giulio de Medici. Born in 1478, Giulio was an illegitimate son of Giuliano de Medici, brother of Lorenzo the Magnificent. His father had been assassinated in the Papacy conspiracy, a brutal attempt to overthrow Medici rule in Florence just months before Giulio's birth. This tragic beginning meant Giulio grew up in the household of his uncle Lorenzo, alongside his cousins, including Giovanni, the future Leo X. Despite his illegitimate birth, Giulio was recognized and educated as a Medici. He joined the Knights of Rhodes, a military order, and later, when his cousin Giovanni became Pope Leo X, Giulio's career soared. Leo X legitimized Giulio's birth, arguing that his parents had been secretly engaged. He made Giulio an archbishop, then a cardinal, and appointed him to several key administrative roles within the church. Giulio became Leo X's closest advisor, a highly skilled diplomat and administrator who managed the vast bureaucracy of the Papal States. He was known for his intelligence, his caution, and his ability to navigate complex political situations, traits that often contrasted with Leo X's more jovial and impulsive nature. When Adrian VI died, Cardinal Giulio de Medici was the strongest candidate. He had broad support from both the French and imperial factions, a rare feat. After a long and contentious conclave, he was elected Pope on November 19, 1523, taking the name Clement VII. He was 45 years old. Clement VII inherited a church in crisis. The Protestant Reformation was gaining ground, spreading from Germany into other parts of Northern Europe. The financial state of the papacy was precarious, burdened by the debts accumulated during Leo X's lavish reign. Europe was a powder keg, with the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and King Francis I of France locked in a bitter struggle for supremacy. Clement VII, a man of indecision and caution, found himself caught in the middle of these titanic forces. Clement VII's papacy is largely defined by his disastrous political maneuvers. He tried to play Charles V against Francis I, hoping to maintain a balance of power that would protect the Papal States and Medici interests in Florence. However, his indecisiveness and frequent shifts in alliance earned him the distrust of both monarchs. He formed an alliance with Francis I, hoping to curb Charles V's growing power in Italy. This move proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Charles V, infuriated by Clement VII's perceived betrayal, unleashed his imperial army, a motley crew of German mercenaries, Spanish soldiers, and Italian brigands, on the Papal States. In May 1527, this army, unpaid and undisciplined, reached Rome. What followed was one of the most horrifying events in the city's long history, the sack of Rome. For 8 brutal months, the imperial troops pillaged, burned, raped, and murdered their way through the Eternal City. Churches were desecrated, palaces ransacked, and countless civilians suffered. Clement VII, trapped in the Castel Sant'Angelo, a fortress near the Vatican, watched helplessly as his city was destroyed. He eventually surrendered and was held captive for months, forced to pay a huge ransom and concede significant territories to Charles V. The sack of Rome was a devastating blow to the papacy's prestige and authority. It showed the world that the Pope was no longer an unassailable spiritual and temporal power, but a vulnerable player in a brutal political game. It also had profound religious implications, with many seeing it as divine punishment for the Church's corruption and worldliness. Clement VII, once a respected diplomat, was now a humiliated prisoner. After his release, Clement VII tried to repair his relationship with Charles V, eventually crowning him Holy Roman Emperor in Bologna in 1530. This coronation was the last time a pope would crown an emperor, symbolizing the shift in power dynamics. Clement VII also relied on Charles V's support to restore Medici rule in Florence, which had been overthrown by a Republican uprising after the sack of Rome. Charles V's troops besieged Florence for months, eventually restoring Clement VII's cousin, Alessandro de Medici, as duke. Another major challenge to Clement VII's authority came from England. The king, Henry VIII, who had once been hailed by Leo X as defender of the faith, now desperately wanted an annulment from his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was Charles V's aunt, and Charles V vehemently opposed the annulment. Clement VII was caught in an impossible bind. Granting the annulment would offend the powerful emperor and implicitly challenge the validity of a previous papal dispensation that had allowed Henry to marry Catherine in the first place. Denying it would alienate a powerful English monarch. Clement VII procrastinated, hoping the issue would resolve itself. He sent legates, held lengthy trials, and employed every delaying tactic he could imagine. But Henry VIII was impatient. Frustrated by the Pope's refusal, Henry took matters into his own hands. In 1534, the English Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring the king, not the Pope, the head of the Church of England. This dramatic break, driven by personal desire and political ambition, resulted in the English Reformation, forever severing England from the Roman Catholic Church. Clement VII formally excommunicated Henry VIII, but it was too late. Another significant portion of Christendom had been lost. Clement VII's papacy was a series of misfortunes and misjudgments. He was a man more suited to administration and diplomacy than to leading the church through a period of unprecedented crisis. He patronized artists like Michelangelo, who painted the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel under his commission, but his artistic legacy is often overshadowed by his political failures. He was a skilled humanist, educated and intelligent, but his cautious nature often translated into indecision at critical moments. He passed away in 1534, a broken man who had seen Rome sacked, his authority diminished, and England lost to the papacy. His cautious approach and diplomatic failures solidified the divisions caused by the Reformation and profoundly weakened the papacy's standing in Europe. He embodied the challenges faced by the church in an era of powerful monarchs, religious upheaval, and shifting alliances. His actions, or lack thereof, inadvertently changed the course of history for centuries to come. Number 3. Pius IV, Giovanni de Medici. The papacy, after Clement VII's tumultuous reign, desperately needed stability and reform. However, the next pope, Paul III, though a vigorous reformer in some ways, was from the Farnese family, not the Medici. After his death and the brief reigns of Julius III and Paul IV, the papal throne once again saw a man bearing the Medici name. This was Giovanni Angelo Medici, who would become Pope Pius IV. Born in Milan in 1499, Giovanni Angelo Medici belonged to a different branch of the Medici family than the Florentine bankers who had produced Leo X and Clement VII. His family was from Lombardy, a region in northern Italy. Though not directly connected to the powerful Florentine dynasty, his family proudly bore the Medici name, a coincidence that likely helped his career. Giovanni Angelo was not destined for the church from an early age. He was a brilliant student, excelling in law and medicine at the University of Bologna. He pursued a career in law, becoming a respected jurist and administrator in various Italian cities. His practical experience in governance and legal matters would prove invaluable later in his life. His path to the papacy began when his older brother, Giacomo, achieved prominence as a military commander. This connection, combined with Giovanni Angelo's own talents, brought him to Rome. He entered the service of the church relatively late in life, at the age of 38, during the pontificate of Paul III. His legal background and administrative skills quickly caught the attention of the Curia. He rose rapidly through the ranks, becoming a bishop and then a cardinal in 1549. His reputation for moderation, integrity, and good judgment made him a respected figure within the College of Cardinals. In 1559, after the death of the stern and controversial Paul IV, the cardinals gathered for another conclave. The atmosphere was charged. Paul IV's rigid reforms and his aggressive use of the Inquisition had alienated many. The church needed a leader who could heal divisions and guide the ongoing Council of Trent, which had been suspended for years. Giovanni Angelo Medici, with his calm demeanor and legal acumen, emerged as a consensus candidate. He was elected Pope on December 25th, 1559, taking the name Pius IV. He was 60 years old. Pius IV faced an enormous task. The Council of Trent, first convened in 1545, was meant to address the challenges of the Protestant Reformation and reform the Catholic Church from within. However, it had been interrupted multiple times and remained unfinished. Pius IV's most significant achievement was successfully reconvening and bringing the Council of Trent to a conclusion in 1563. This was a monumental diplomatic feat, requiring him to navigate the conflicting interests of various Catholic rulers and factions within the Church. He ensured that the Council's decrees, which clarified Catholic doctrine, condemned Protestant heresies, and mandated significant internal reforms, were finalized and promulgated. The Council of Trent's decrees had a profound and lasting impact. They reaffirmed traditional Catholic teachings such as the importance of sacraments, the authority of the Pope, and the veneration of saints. They also instituted crucial reforms concerning clerical discipline, priestly training, and the elimination of abuses like the sale of church offices. Pius IV dedicated his papacy to implementing these reforms. He established seminaries for the training of priests, reformed the Vatican bureaucracy, and sought to curb financial corruption within the Church. He emphasized the importance of pastoral care and spiritual renewal. Pius IV, unlike his Florentine Medici predecessors, was not a lavish patron of the arts in the same way. He was more pragmatic, focused on church governance and practical reforms. However, he did continue some building projects in Rome, including fortifications and a gate, the Porta Pia, designed by Michelangelo. He also supported the arts when they served the Church's spiritual aims. One of his most notable appointments was his nephew Charles Borromeo to the cardinalate. Borromeo, a devout and energetic reformer, became a key figure in implementing the Tridentine reforms, especially in Milan. His work exemplified the new spirit of the Counter-Reformation, emphasizing catechesis, pastoral visits, and strict clerical discipline. Pius IV also dealt with some controversial figures from the previous pontificate. He released and later acquitted two cardinals, Giovanni Moroni and Aloysius Foscarini, who had been imprisoned by Paul IV on charges of heresy by the Inquisition. This act demonstrated a more conciliatory and fair approach to justice, although the Inquisition itself continued its work under his reign. His papacy was marked by a more moderate and practical approach compared to his immediate predecessors. He avoided direct conflict with powerful monarchs when possible, focusing on spiritual matters and internal church strengthening. He tried to foster a sense of unity among Catholic rulers against the growing threat of the Ottoman Empire, although a unified crusade never materialized. He also maintained a firm stance against Protestantism, seeking to restore Catholic influence in areas that had strayed. He tried to reconcile with Queen Elizabeth I of England, offering recognition if she would send representatives to the Council of Trent, but this attempt failed, setting the stage for future conflicts between Rome and England. Pius IV died in 1565 after a papacy of nearly 6 years. He was succeeded by the austere and deeply religious Pius V, who would continue the implementation of the Tridentine reforms with even greater rigor. Pius IV's legacy is defined by his successful conclusion of the Council of Trent, which provided the framework for the Catholic Counter-Reformation. His leadership brought much-needed stability and clarity to the Church, allowing it to regroup and respond to the challenges of the Protestant movements. He transformed the papacy from a vulnerable political entity into a more unified and spiritually focused institution, profoundly altering its course. Number 4. Leo XI, Alessandro Ottaviano de Medici. The papacy continued its turbulent journey through the late 16th and early 17th centuries. After the Counter-Reformation popes like Pius V and Gregory XIII and the builder Pope Sixtus V, the papal throne saw a rapid succession of short reigns. It was in this period, at the turn of the 17th century, that another Florentine Medici would briefly hold the highest office in the church. His name was Alessandro Ottaviano de Medici, and he would become Pope Leo the 11th. Born in Florence in 1535, Alessandro Ottaviano de Medici was a great-nephew of the famous Pope Leo X, making him a direct descendant of the Florentine banking dynasty. His mother was Francesca Salviati, whose mother, Lucrezia Salviati, was the sister of Giovanni de Medici, who became Pope Leo X. This meant Alessandro carried the distinguished Medici lineage, though not as directly as Leo X or Clement VII. He grew up in a Florence ruled by Cosimo, the first de Medici, the first Grand Duke of Tuscany, who continued the family's patronage of the arts and consolidation of power. Alessandro initially pursued a career in the Florentine government, serving as a diplomat and ambassador for Cosimo I. He was known for his piety, intelligence, and diplomatic skills. His spiritual inclinations led him to consider entering the priesthood, a decision he made later in life. He was ordained a priest in 1567 and quickly rose through the church hierarchy. He was appointed Bishop of Pistoia, then Archbishop of Florence. His diplomatic experience made him a natural choice for important Vatican missions. He served as papal legate to France for 15 years, a crucial period marked by the French wars of religion and the intricate politics of the French monarchy. During his time in France, he gained deep insights into European diplomacy and cultivated strong relationships with the French court. He became a cardinal in 1583 under Pope Gregory XIII. His long experience in both secular and ecclesiastical governance, combined with his noble birth and personal piety, made him a respected figure in the College of Cardinals. In March 1605, Pope Clement VIII, who had reigned for a long and influential 13 years, passed away. The conclave that followed was intense, with powerful factions vying for control. The Spanish and French crowns, as always, exerted significant pressure to elect a pope favorable to their interests. The Cardinal Alessandro Ottaviano de Medici was a compromise candidate. His long diplomatic service in France made him acceptable to the French faction, while his Italian roots and perceived moderation made him palatable to others. After days of deliberation, he was elected pope on April 1st, 1605, taking the name Leo the 11th, in honor of his illustrious great-uncle, Leo X. He was 70 years old. The news of his election was met with great anticipation. People hoped that his wisdom and experience, honed over decades of service, would bring stability and continued reform to the church. However, their hopes were tragically short-lived. Leo XI's papacy was one of the shortest in history. Just 27 days after his election, he fell ill. His coronation on April 10th was a grand affair, as tradition demanded, but soon after, his health rapidly deteriorated. The Roman spring was often damp and unpredictable, and an elderly man might easily catch a chill. The details of his illness are not entirely clear, but he succumbed quickly. On April 27th, 1605, Pope Leo XI passed away. His reign was so brief that he had little time to enact any significant policies or changes. He had time for only a few appointments and public acts. His death sent shockwaves through Rome and the Catholic world. It was a stark reminder of the fragile nature of life and the unpredictable path of the papacy. The phrase papae breves, meaning brief popes, became a common saying in Rome, referring to such fleeting pontificates. Despite its brevity, Leo XI's papacy is not entirely without significance. It highlighted the continued influence of the Medici family in high church office, even if this branch was less directly connected to the ducal line in Florence at this time. His election also demonstrated the ongoing power struggles within the College of Cardinals and the persistent influence of European monarchies in papal elections. The conclave that elected him was a complex dance of alliances and rivalries, ending in a compromised candidate who, through no fault of his own, was unable to leave a lasting mark. His pontificate serves as a historical footnote, a what-if moment in papal history. What reforms might he have enacted? How might he have shaped the Counter-Reformation? These questions remain unanswered. His passing led to yet another conclave just weeks later, which would elect Pope Paul V. The brief reign of Leo XI underscored the unpredictable nature of power and the fleeting grasp of even the most powerful positions. It stands as a testament to the fact that even popes, seemingly elevated above mortal concerns, are ultimately subject to the same vulnerabilities as any other human being. Number 5. Urban VIII Maffeo Barberini. The Baroque era exploded across Europe in the 17th century, a time of dramatic art, grand architecture, and intense religious and political conflict. At the heart of this storm, another pope with a significant, though indirect, Medici connection would rise to power. His name was Maffeo Barberini, and he would become Pope Urban VIII. Born in Florence in 1568, Maffeo Barberini came from a prominent Florentine family. His mother was Costanza Magalotti. Her mother, Giovanni de Medici, was a granddaughter of Lucrezia de Medici, who was Lorenzo the Magnificent's sister. This meant Maffeo Barberini was a great-grandson of a Medici on his mother's side, a direct if somewhat distant link to the powerful Florentine dynasty. This lineage gave him a social standing and connections that certainly aided his early career. He received an excellent education, studying law at the University of Pisa, and then entering the papal curia. Maffeo Barberini was a brilliant and ambitious young man. He was known for his sharp intellect, his eloquent speaking, and his talent for Latin poetry. He rose quickly through the ranks, serving as a diplomat and nuncio to France, where he developed strong relationships with the French court. His diplomatic skills and administrative acumen made him a favored figure in Rome. He was made a cardinal in 1606 by Pope Paul V. In 1623, after the death of Pope Gregory XV, the cardinals gathered for the conclave. The 30 Years' War, a devastating conflict that engulfed much of Europe, was raging. The papacy needed a strong, decisive leader. Cardinal Barberini, known for his administrative competence, his diplomatic experience, and his strong personality, emerged as the leading candidate. He was elected pope on August 6, 1623, taking the name Urban VIII. He was 55 years old, a relatively young age for a pope at the time. Urban VIII's papacy, which lasted for 21 years, was one of the longest and most influential of the Baroque era. He was a quintessential Renaissance prince turned Baroque pope. He had a deep love for art and architecture, and under his patronage, Rome was transformed into a masterpiece of Baroque splendor. He commissioned the greatest artists of his time, most notably Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who became his favorite artist. Bernini created iconic works for Urban VIII, including the monumental bronze baldacchino over the high altar in St. Peter's Basilica, a towering canopy that remains a focal point of the church. He also designed the breathtaking Fountain of the Triton and completed the construction of the Palazzo Barberini, the family palace in Rome, which became a symbol of Barberini power and artistic taste. Urban VIII famously remarked, "What the barbarians did not do, the Barberini did," referring to his family's use of ancient Roman bronze from the Pantheon for Bernini's baldacchino, a saying that highlighted both his ambition and his disregard for some historical preservation. Beyond his artistic patronage, Urban VIII was a powerful and assertive temporal ruler. He significantly expanded the Papal States using both diplomacy and military force. He modernized the papal army and fortified its defenses, emphasizing the Pope's role as a secular prince. His foreign policy was complex and often contradictory. He tried to balance the power of France and Spain, often leaning towards France, a strategy that alienated some Catholic powers, particularly the Holy Roman Emperor. His involvement in the 30 Years' War was often criticized as he seemed more concerned with maintaining a balance of power in Italy and extending papal influence than with leading a united Catholic front against Protestantism. Perhaps the most famous and controversial event of Urban VIII's pontificate was the Galileo affair. Galileo Galilei, the renowned astronomer, had published works supporting the Copernican heliocentric model of the universe, which placed the sun, not the earth, at the center. This theory challenged the prevailing Aristotelian and geocentric worldview supported by church tradition. Urban VIII and Galileo had a complex relationship. They had been friends in earlier years, and Urban VIII had initially shown some support for Galileo's scientific pursuits. However, as the controversy grew, especially after Galileo published his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems in 1632, the Pope came under immense pressure from conservative elements within the Church, particularly the Inquisition. In 1633, Galileo was put on trial by the Roman Inquisition. He was found vehemently suspect of heresy for defending Copernicanism, forced to recant his views, and placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life. This condemnation of Galileo has become a symbol of the conflict between science and religion, and it cast a long shadow over Urban VIII's legacy. It showed the papacy's determination to uphold its doctrinal authority, even when faced with compelling scientific evidence. Urban VIII was a strong, often autocratic ruler. He fostered a system of nepotism, appointing several of his relatives to important church offices, including 3 of his nephews as cardinals. This practice, common at the time, allowed the Barberini family to amass immense wealth and influence, making them one of the most powerful families in Rome. His strong will and ambition, however, also led to conflicts. He maintained a strong stance against the spread of Protestantism despite his sometimes ambiguous political alliances in the 30 Years' War. He also strengthened the Vatican's diplomatic corps and expanded its missionary efforts around the globe. Urban VIII died in 1644, leaving behind a Rome transformed by Baroque art and a papacy deeply involved in European power politics. His pontificate was marked by both monumental achievements in art and a controversial legacy in science. He embodied the tension of his era, a spiritual leader deeply entangled in secular power, a patron of beauty, and a defender of traditional doctrines. His actions profoundly shaped the papacy's image and its role in the shifting landscape of 17th century Europe. Number 6. Innocent VIII, Giovanni Battista Cibo. Before the popes who bore the Medici name directly, before the grand schemes of Leo X, the papacy found itself intertwined with the rising star of the Florentine banking family in a way that would profoundly shape its future. This story involves Giovanni Battista Cibo, who became Pope Innocent VIII, a pontiff whose reign was effectively a satellite of the Medici. Born in Genoa in 1432, Giovanni Battista Cibo came from a noble but not extraordinarily wealthy family. He was a man of the church from a young age, well-educated, and initially known for his relatively humble demeanor. His early career saw him serve in various capacities within the papal curia, gaining experience in administration and diplomacy. He was appointed Bishop of Savona and then Cardinal in 1473 by Pope Sixtus IV. Cibo was not known for his intellectual brilliance or his reforming zeal. Instead, his rise to power was largely due to his political astuteness and his ability to cultivate powerful allies. And no ally was more powerful in late 15th century Italy than Lorenzo de Medici, the Magnificent, the de facto ruler of Florence. Lorenzo, the patriarch of the Florentine Medici, had a singular vision to secure his family's influence not just in Florence, but across Italy, and ultimately within the very heart of the papacy. In 1484, Pope Sixtus IV died, and the College of Cardinals gathered for the conclave. The atmosphere was thick with intrigue and bribery, a common feature of papal elections in this era. Lorenzo de Medici exerted his considerable influence using his financial power and political connections to sway the election. He strongly backed Cardinal Cibo, seeing in him a pliable ally who would serve Medici interests. Lorenzo understood that having a friendly pope in Rome was paramount to his family's security and prosperity. After a contentious election, Giovanni Battista Cibo was elected pope on August 29, 1484, taking the name Innocent VIII. He was 52 years old. Innocent VIII's papacy immediately became a reflection of Medici power. He was seen as a pope largely dependent on Lorenzo de Medici for financial support and political guidance. This dependence was solidified by a truly groundbreaking alliance. Innocent VIII's illegitimate son, Francesco Cibo, was married to Lorenzo de Medici's daughter, Maddalena de Medici, in 1488. This marriage was a strategic masterstroke by Lorenzo, cementing a dynastic bond between the papal family and the Medici. It was the first time a pope's direct offspring married into a leading Italian ruling family, a shocking precedent that blurred the lines between sacred and secular power. Through this marriage, Lorenzo gained unprecedented access and influence within the Vatican. He effectively became an unofficial advisor to the Pope, shaping papal policy, securing key appointments, and directing church finances. It was through Lorenzo's influence that his own son, Giovanni de Medici, the future Pope Leo X, received the cardinal's hat at the tender age of 13 under Innocent VIII's pontificate. This was a direct result of the Medici-Cibo alliance, a crucial step in the Medici's long game to claim the papacy for their own. Innocent VIII's reign was plagued by financial difficulties. Despite the Medici's wealth, the papacy was often in debt due to wars and lavish spending. He resorted to various means to raise funds, including the creation and sale of new offices within the Curia. This practice, known as simony, further fueled corruption and weakened the moral authority of the Church. He also tried to organize a crusade against the Ottoman Turks, but this never materialized due to lack of funds and political will among European rulers. One of the darker aspects of Innocent VIII's papacy was his issuance of the papal bull, Summus Desiderantes Effectibus, in 1484. This bull condemned witchcraft and heresy and granted sweeping powers to 2 German inquisitors to prosecute witches. This document, intended to curb perceived threats to faith, inadvertently fueled the European witch hunts, leading to widespread persecution and torture. It reflected the fears and superstitions of the era, but also showed a papacy willing to use its spiritual authority for brutal ends. In his foreign policy, Innocent VIII often found himself entangled in Italian conflicts, particularly with the Kingdom of Naples. He lacked the strong leadership to unite the various Italian states, or to assert decisive papal authority over the powerful European monarchs. His reign was largely one of accommodation and compromise, heavily influenced by the Florentine patron who held his family's strings. He was a patron of the arts, commissioning some works for the Vatican, but his legacy pales in comparison to later popes in this regard. He also founded a garden in the Vatican, the Belvedere Courtyard, which would later be transformed by Pope Julius II. Innocent VIII died in 1492. His passing marked the end of an era dominated by his reliance on the Medici. However, his papacy had laid the groundwork for future Medici dominance. By cementing the family's presence in Rome, by appointing the young Giovanni de Medici as cardinal, and by demonstrating the ease with which secular power could influence the sacred throne, Innocent VIII's reign opened the door for the full flowering of the Medici papacy. His story is a testament to the quiet, yet profound ways in which dynastic alliances and political machinations can change the course of history, even without bearing the famous family name.